newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record.
Tough days in the media, and we are some tough people here to talk about it, right? I'm Rex Smith here with the Media Project and our colleagues here. That would be David Gastina, our producer, making noise from that corner.
Put your dukes up, Rex. Put your dukes up.
Barbara Lombardo is over at the end of the studio table. How are you?
Good. Play nice, guys.
Oh, okay. We're going to try to do our best. And Judy Patrick is here next to me in the studio.
You know, my head is spinning with all
Really?
this news we have to deal with day in and day out. And this is just the news about the media.
Yeah, well, it's true, but you don't know actually, folks, all of this program is going to be about the challenges confronting the effort to give ethical journalism to listeners, viewers, readers in the era of Trump. And you don't really know what you're supposed to do in the face of a challenge that is this big, where what is truthful is often not presented to the people who are the greatest supporters of the president, where there are so many assaults on reality that real journalism is struggling.
And if we put our dukes up and we fight, how much of a dent would it make?
And it underscores then the Trumpian argument that the media is all against him, because truth-telling would, in fact, be against somebody who doesn't speak the truth. But it is such a challenge. And we are sitting here trying to figure out, so what would be the first thing that you would do? So, Judy, what do you think is the priority? If you were an editor still, what would you be trying to do to assert reality to your readers?
So I think the bottom line here is we have to establish that truth is a value we believe in. And we have to establish the fact that truth is important to the functioning of our democracy. Believe it or not, I think that people overlook that or people don't understand that. So I think that is what we need to be doing going forward. But also we need to keep our head down and embrace it. So often I hear people say, oh, I just can't handle the news. You can't do that. You are people who live in this country. You have an obligation to stay informed. That is your job. There are 24 hours in a day. Use some of those to keep abreast of what's happening in your government, in your name.
And you might add and support the media who are providing that truthful. You've just had, David, a successful fund drive.
Amazing. $1,250,000 in less than 5 days on air, full-time, all out. And that over and over again was reflected in our listeners' comments of just what Judy is saying, that if we don't understand what journalism is about, if we don't understand the values of journalism, to seek the truth and report it fully and act independently and minimize harm, and we don't know what those mean, we're not going to get a fair shot at information. We're not going to be able to decide, oh, this is a trustworthy source, but this is not. And yet the people who've been listening to WAMC now since 1979 have been told from the very beginning, the very story of this radio station is that a local college that's no longer here, a Catholic college, wanted us not to say the word abortion on the air. And we said no, and we got up out of the chair and walked out of the room and found somewhere else to go. That independence, that ability to call the shots fairly, to look at evidence-based information and tell as close to the truth as we can get it, is essential to have what we call a democracy, in this case, a representative democracy. We don't have that. We can begin to see right now when people who get in power think the press should only say nice things about them, how skewed our reality has become.
Barbara, on the local level, we have exactly what David's talking about. We have the opportunity, though, to be truth tellers locally. We've worked in the local press, those are sitting on this table, and it's a little bit different from the Washington challenge, but it's the same fundamental issue, right?
It is the same issue, and shout out to Judy for being so eloquent about the importance of staying informed on local news, all news and local news, and taking action. And part of it is supporting your local newspapers, your local radio stations that are providing news, and then using those vehicles once you're informed to then take action. It really matters on a local level.
Well, won't that perhaps begin to translate then? I think that one of the reasons that we have so much hostility toward the media writ large is because people have lost touch with the media that is very local to them.
Well, it's nothing new to have politicians on the local level be very upset at you if you are portraying them in a bad light or not reporting the way they think they ought to be reported. And what's happening now is that people who feel that way are being empowered from the top down to put fear in the hearts of newspaper and radio and TV.
Well, there is that. And I'm concerned, and I think we ought to all be concerned about the caving in that we're seeing that suggests that the bullying by Trump is getting its way. ABC has, paid $15 million to settle a lawsuit that they easily could have won. George Stephanopoulos used the word rape instead of sexual abuse in terms of what Donald Trump was found liable for. CBS seems to be on the verge of making a settlement to try to make a $10 billion lawsuit go away over this baloney that they edited a Kamala Harris interview.
Even worse, they turned it over.
Yeah.
They turned over a transcript. Where is the courage gone in this country at that level to do something like that? We would never agree to do that. It was almost automatic. I think you would
Absolutely.
agree that journalists would just say, no, take me to court. Go ahead.
Right. One of my first experiences as a reporter in the Saratogian was being told to go before the grand jury for something that I saw and wrote about having to do with the police department, and our attorney tried to quash the subpoena.
Yeah.
It's an automatic thing that you would try to do.
Journalists are not, and there's a reason for that. It's because journalists are not the arm of the government. They are independent observers on behalf of citizens, and therefore you can't be an agent of the government by being a part of their investigation.
And this is bad precedent.
And over the years, we would have different, I want to call them guidelines as opposed to policies. If they're called policies, then you get in trouble legally sometimes.
That's right.
The,
I forgot that.
But what are the guidelines for reporters for keeping their notes? Because you could be called upon to provide your notes. And if your usual practice is to save everything, then it hurts your case if you suddenly don't have the material for this particular case that was extra sensitive that you were sued on. But that seems like such small potatoes to what's going on now.
I think part of the problem in these cases is the fact that they're owned by these large conglomerates of bigger organizations that have higher needs. They have to satisfy their shareholders. The mission of journalism is not the primary mission in it. And when push comes to shove, they will cave on whether or not to hand over the transcript rather than fight it as they should. They have lost their way on these issues.
You are so right about that. And I have to say, by the way, this is the subject of I do a commentary on Monday on Midday Magazine. That is exactly what I think is the fact. It is that in the days when the network newscasts were making a little bit of money, but not a lot, when they were not supposed to be a profit center as we were growing up, when Walter Cronkite was in the CBS Evening News, they still made a little bit of money off the newscast, but it wasn't as though they were supposed to be big money makers. Now, Paramount, which owns CBS, has this big merger coming with Skydance. It's a multi-billion-dollar merger, and they need the FCC's approval because they own broadcast licenses. And that's, I think, why they've given over their transcript and their raw tape to the FCC.
Right, because Trump picked the head of the FCC, and he now will do Trump's bidding. And we're seeing those people being put in those spots to do just that. And when it comes to this country and the media, we pointed this out before, but your former newspaper, the Hearst Company and others, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they have money, because they could, have it to defend themselves against lawsuits like this. And yet what we're seeing is what Judy's saying, these even larger corporations that are diversified and have all these other interests at heart, they're just looking at the equation and saying, this isn't worth it. And they're probably looking at the numbers and showing less and less people are reading and watching.
Well, they're missing the commitment to
the values,
to the First Amendment, and to informing the public. They don't have that mission in their heart.
And it seems to have a cascading effect. Don't you think that there's one after another? And like every day I'm disappointed by, the larger media organizations in my world.
Well, many of them are publicly traded. I was fortunate Hearst is privately held, so they didn't have to report to shareholders every quarter. And I think that the publicly traded corporations in a country where corporations have been told now for 70 years that their only obligation is to return maximum profits to shareholders. If that is their fundamental mission of these publicly traded corporations, of course they're going to make these decisions. If we had, this gets into economic theory, but if you had a different approach to shareholder value, the way B Corps, that is, corporations that have public benefit as a part of their mission, if that were built into their charter, as it is the case in some companies, like Warby Parker for your eyeglasses, Tom McCann shoes, right? No, Tom shoes.
I'm
Not
going to pull my Warby Parker glasses
You
out
got
right
them with
now.
you?
do that, yeah.
Let's take a closer look, Judy.
We'll take a picture of it and post it online.
It's a
Right
great
last
thing.
week.
You know, these companies actually do have a public service mission as part of their charter. And I think that that's the case of a lot of privately held companies as well. But most of these big publicly traded companies that have become owners of major media outlets are vulnerable to shareholder lawsuits if they don't cave in.
And even the nonprofit, like public broadcasting, as Ronald Reagan once called us, news from Managua, you know, that's not a bulwark either, because that Corporation for Public Broadcasting is now in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. And while WAMC can most likely weather that storm, a lot of public radio stations across this country will go dark.
So let's make clear what the consequences are here. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting has an annual budget of $500 million, and the CPB provides some money to NPR, some money to PBS. Yes. But the problem is that if there were, instead of $500 million, there were $10 billion, let's see, that would still amount to just 1/100th of 1% of the federal budget. But in the United States, we provide only, isn't it about $3 per taxpayer per year for public broadcasting?
While overseas, they provide even more.
Yep, $70 in many of the European countries. And so we need a thriving payroll, let's say, for newsrooms to succeed. But what are the prospects of that? Not at all.
A paltry sum. Now think about that. By providing truthful information, you are an educational institution. And you're educating the public on the world around them, the world they might not experience directly. Just what our jobs are. Then you'd be lifting boats because you'd be educating people. They'd begin to understand the world in a similar way. And maybe we would come together over important issues. But instead, we're bifurcated, we're divided, we're in extreme camps from one another. And all the time we're being distracted by all these little pieces of ice cream and cake they're throwing at us from social media. And we're losing our ability to wade through this mess.
There was a really good column in the New York Times and a commentary piece by the executive director of the Knight First Amendment Institute, part of Columbia University, and he talks about case by case going through these current instances where the media companies are capitulating before they even have to, and why he is showing that it's not necessary for them to have to do that. Those are cases that if they were willing to fight, that they would be likely to win.
Well, they would surely win them on the merits, on the legal, but it is their public relations value that they're fighting. And that, again, goes to the values that underlie the company. They're not willing to make those kinds of battles because they don't want to get beat up further by President Musk.
I heard
You're
that,
giving
Rex.
the and how do you get into a situation where your transcripts and the video of an interview, the raw tapes of an interview, of course that, and I think readers understand that anything that they're seeing on air is not, start to finish the exact things that were said.
We occasionally
we
even edit things in this show, rarely, right, David? But there's a little bit of fixing of when we stumble and when I clear my throat too many times.
Absolutely, but I'd never change what you said,
Right.
Rex,
Of
especially
course
when
not.
you say nice things.
Yeah.
But this really undermines our credibility, because every time a news media organization capitulates, you'll see President Trump say, "See, I told you so. See, they settled with me because ABC was wrong."
More so, the lawyers representing Trump are going to say, see, that's precedent, Judge. That's precedent.
That is very dangerous.
Here's some ideas. This is not going to happen in this Congress. That is, we're not going to have any support. But in state legislatures, there could be some funding. Legislatures might consider allowing citizens to allocate tax dollars to local news outlets of their choosing, for example, so that you could basically give the taxpayers that opportunity. There would have to be some qualifications. Newsrooms would have to be physically rooted in their community, something like that. You could have citizens' assembly that could have something to do in local communities to create news outlets. We need stable long-term journalism funding. I do think that a great solution, of course, is individual support for nonprofit journalism. And that is not only public radio, of course, but these wonderful outlets that are springing up around the country. The problem is a lot of them don't function in the local communities where most of the news is falling down, right? You've made this observation, Judy, that there are a lot of communities that don't have as much local coverage as they used to.
Right. The nonprofit model is not going to work in a small village with 3,000 people
Right.
because there's not going to be a nonprofit entity there to support that. And while a lot of these regional nonprofits are doing stellar work in terms of investigative reporting, it's not the day in, day out kind of community-based, local government-based accountability journalism that small communities need. I mean, we were never able to cover every village, every town, every
Sure.
county in New York State, for example, but at least we used to cover a lot more of it, and that's missing. I do think that the nonprofit model works on a more regional level. Like WAMC has a broad geographic footprint. Small towns don't have that as much.
Yeah, it's cherry picking for us as a region. You have to find those issues that are experienced in the wider region and try to give that as an example. And then while you're talking about that specific location, mentioning it's also happening here in Massachusetts and New York and Connecticut. But it's quite a challenge at our level, a regional level, to really get down to the local races even, let's say in the political season, and people will criticize us for that. How come I don't know about this?
Right.
But we can't possibly cover everything.
Well, the TU had the same challenge because you have a big footprint, or you had.
Oh, yeah. We used to have to try to cover 77 high schools in the sports section, and that was really
Right.
ridiculous. You couldn't.
How do we cover college sports at WAMC
Right.
with all the colleges in a 7-state
But
listening
you
area?
do the best you can. You make an effort. You try to be on top of what's going on and hope. And, in our communities, we have public libraries. Because of the history of this, libraries were important to convey the knowledge and the traditions of generations. We are at a breaking point now where we need to have some kind of a similar commitment to information sharing, because the capacity to share bad information, to distort the truth, is so broad that there needs to be a commitment to truth-telling. The problem is that you have the richest man in the world in control of a huge platform that he is principally using to distort reality. And the fact of the matter is, if you are on X, the platform of Elon Musk, you shouldn't be, because that is a lying pile of something.
It's his exclusive voice box.
It is. And we need to try to squelch it. And the best way to do that, of course, is to have true information to drive out the bad. I know that sounds like a Pollyanna, but what else are we going to do?
Well, part of it is switching to that other, to
Blue
Blue
Sky.
Sky.
Blue Sky is
And
great.
using that. And on the local level, partnering with other, usually nonprofits, but other organizations that are trying to do the right thing about informing. And I think of the League of Women Voters as an example, in the Saratoga County League for the school board elections, which come up in May. They send out questionnaires to all of the school board candidates. In the municipal elections, they do the same thing, and they publish it on the website. And the local media, I hope, is still linking to those bits of information and letting people know that they can learn something by going there. So it's something.
I love the idea of equating local news with the local public library. I think that's a good way to even approach it. And you'd have regional libraries as well. It just conveys the importance of it. We just needed Andrew Carnegie.
Yeah, exactly. And it is also the responsibility of the wealthy people, the people who have been, and the quasi-wealthy, the almost wealthy, to do their part. The arts have been supported by philanthropy throughout history. Think of the Medicis in ancient Florence, and think of how the Catholic Church supported the arts for years. And that, in fact, is how great art has been created. We now need that same commitment to truth-telling, to journalism. We need the wealthy to step up and have some people of good heart stand against the Elon Musks of the world.
I think we are solving this problem.
Hang on. Right here. Hold on. Pause it now. Pause it now. We're forgetting something that's now sweeping in
What's
and is
that?
going to change everything as we know it, and that's artificial intelligence.
Oh, no.
I mean, my goodness. Now, how are the press, how are we, with our two eyeballs and our ears, how are we going to verify something when it comes in on a deep fake? Are we prepared for this? And what will that do to our reality? What conflict could that cause? Who will get hurt? Who will die as a result? These are serious issues, and I don't think we really understand where it's going.
Yeah, we're not prepared. There are academic experts, there are technicians,
Right.
Scientists who can help us decipher what's real and what's not, but you don't have them activated quickly enough to be able to find the deep fakes.
And even the godfather of this artificial intelligence has really been warning everyone about the dangers. When you create something that's that much smarter than human beings, will it eventually make a leap where we can't even explain what it's doing?
Hal.
Yeah. Good morning, Dave.
It's an important point because it's News Literacy Week this week, National News Literacy Week. And there's a
Well done,
.org,
Judy.
there's a .org website you can go to learn more about educating yourself about determining what's real and what's not. But the bottom line here is, if it seems too good or too crazy to be real, double check it with credible sources you really trust, even though those sources can sometimes be tricked.
You would think that these folks who are creating it would bring in people from the journalist community and say, how can we work on this and make it identifiable?
I'm shocked.
Yeah,
Shocked
they're
that
not
that's
doing
not
that. But
happening.
seriously, we need like a watermark or something in that file that you're going to get that says this is manipulated.
And one of the challenges is not only to recognize that that something coming over AI is wrong, disinformation, but then shutting it down before it spreads.
So there was a blue ribbon panel that was commissioned in part by the Aspen Institute that reported about 6 years ago. There were co-chairs of which Katie Couric was one. And this blue ribbon panel recommended a government effort to do further research to figure out what to do about disinformation. And so the Biden administration created this at the beginning of the Biden administration. The problem was the disinformation panel was very quickly attacked by the far right because it was said to be a disinformation source. They're trying to go after us. And so the Biden administration retreated, closed down the office. The disinformation panel was itself felled by disinformation. How meta. Pardon the expression meta. I don't mean capital M. How ironic.
That's all right. Mark will take the credit.
Thank you, of course. And the problem is serious efforts to get at the issue you're talking about. How do we attack disinformation? How do we try to make sure that AI, and that was before AI had quite leapt the shark this way, how do we make sure that it's not really disinforming us, misinforming us? We can't even get a toehold on that because the radical right has taken hold of things. And this is very difficult because you have then so many players who are still on this earth, are still not out in that ionosphere of intelligence. You have Fox News telling everybody that what President Trump is doing is all good. He's winning everything. It's just fine. And so many tens of millions of Americans believe that.
Yeah, well, I don't care. Laura Trump now has a show, and I'm going to watch it.
How unprecedented. Can you imagine giving a column? So if you had a newspaper that you were still running and you had the mayor's daughter-in-law writing a column about local affairs, why not? Huh?
Yeah, that would be wrong. Just so we could be clear about this. This would be wrong. I mean, she was the one who thought she was being considered to be appointed to the Senate, the U.S. Senate, in Marco Rubio's stead. That did not happen. Now, for the record, they're offering, Fox is giving her what they characterize as a primetime spot. It's primetime weekend nights. That is not primetime at all. I mean, I'm not sure how good she is. I'm probably not going to tune
Pete
out.
Hegseth, by the way, had only a weekend gig too. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
How long before she jumps to a main gig, though, right? They're going to try it out.
Right. She's been on air before, but this is clearly wrong, clearly a stepping stone to other things.
Yeah, but Judy, I'm a Republican, and Jenna Hager-Bush is on NBC's Today Show. Yeah,
And
2
George
years after he was out of the office, and she does nothing about politics.
George Stephanopoulos is an
on
example. He was
ABC.
the communication director for the Clinton White House, and he is now key anchor on ABC.
We had the governor's brother doing television.
Yes, so there has been some bad
It's not without precedent.
Yeah,
Oh, but for the record, I would really rather have journalists doing journalism,
absolutely.
trained journalists, rather than plucking people from the political sphere and plopping them onto panels. I think that a real journalist, even though they may not be as well known or as sexy as some of these people they draw into their spaces, real journalists offer an insight that talking heads that are just former politicians do.
Judy.
Never heard that before.
Rex has told you it's a TV show. Sexy and popular are all what it's about.
Sleeveless
of
dresses,
course
I
they're going
know,
to put
I
her
know.
on. Come on.
By way of full disclosure, I used to be a flack. I was a hack. I became a flack. I went back to hackery.
You were also on TV because you're sexy Rexy.
So there is a lot of precedent for people actually going through this revolving door of politics. Jen Psaki went from the White House to MSNBC. Nicole Wallace was communication director for George W. Bush and is is now on MSNBC. So there is precedent for people who know about politics becoming sort of anchors. But again, that's television, that's entertainment, folks. And this is part of the problem. These are not people who are actually out there on the front lines doing the reporting like Maggie Haberman of the New York Times and so on. This is not hardworking journalism gutting out the real facts of what's going on. This is commentary for the
It's lots of
masses.
opinions and suppositions and trying to figure out, how they can best make their people they support look good.
Now I'm thinking we haven't solved the problem.
We probably
You see, there we are.
I was up, now I'm down.
And so our
Head still
listeners.
spinning.
Maybe next week.
Maybe next week. We'll let folks offer their opinions. We'd love to hear from you folks. Media@wamc.org is how you can have a voice in this program. Give us your thoughts. What should be the role of the media these days? How can we best serve the public interest? How can we fulfill those criteria that David so well enunciated from the Code of Ethics of the Society of Professional Journalists? Seek the truth and report it fully. Act independently. Be transparent and minimize harm. That is our charge. How do we do it, folks? That's the Media Project for this week. David Gastina, our producer, has been here. Barbara Lombardo, formerly editor of the Saratogian. Judy Patrick, the former editor of the Daily Gazette. I'm Rex Smith, formerly of the Times-Union, now of the Upstate American. And you folks are our wonderful listeners. We are grateful to you. We hope you come back again next week for the Media Project.
Now that felt like an hour.
Are such interesting people. They used to work like hell just for romance. But finally, the movies notwithstanding, they all got tired of patches on their pants. They organized a union to get a living wage. They joined with other actors upon a living stage now.
The Media Project is a national production of WAMC, Northeast Public Radio. This week's projectors include former Times-Union editor and current Upstate American Substack columnist Rex Smith, Judy Patrick, Vice President for Editorial Development for the New York Press Association and former editor of the Daily Gazette, and Barbara Lombardo, Adjunct Professor at the University at Albany and former editor of the Saratogian. You can listen to the Media Project anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or anywhere you get your podcasts. I'm your producer, David Gastina. Thanks for listening.
It's funny, Wall Street never has complained. Ah, but publishers have worries, for publishers must go to working folks for readers and to big shots for their dough. Now publishers are such interesting people. It could be prostitution, I don't know. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, circulation, ting-a-ling-a-ling, advertising, get those readers, get that payoff. What a headache, what a mess. Oh, publishers are such interesting people. Let's give 3 cheers for freedom of the press.